March 14th, 1944, 11:47 p.m. Eric Anderson had 40 minutes to live or die. Inside a frozen Norwegian prison camp, 9 SS guards patrolled the night, armed and confident. They had mocked the Viking axe they stole from him, hanging it on their office wall like a joke. They never imagined he'd come back for it. But he did, alone, unarmed, and outnumbered. What happened next stunned even the survivors. In total silence, Anderson turned a forgotten skill into a weapon the SS never saw coming, leading 17 prisoners through 12 miles of enemy territory. And the way he did it is almost unbelievable. Eric Anderson's story began in 1921 in the industrial town of Norwegian. His father spent long days in the aluminum plants, but the heart of the family was his grandfather's small forge, one of the last places in Norway where tools were still shaped entirely by hand. Gunnar Anderson wasn't just a blacksmith. He was a guardian of an ancient craft. Every summer, from the time Eric was 8, the boy lived in that forge. He learned to mold steel, read its heat, and send a hand axe spinning toward wooden targets. Tourists saw it as a novelty. Gunnar didn't. He trained Eric relentlessly. 10 feet, then 20, then 30, until the axe became an extension of his arm. The training was brutal. Eric's shoulders burned daily. His palms split open more times than he could count. But by 16, his skill bordered on unbelievable. He could drive a hand axe into a 6-inch target from 40 feet with near-perfect accuracy. Gunnar had drilled into him that throwing wasn't about raw strength. It was science mixed with instinct. Measure the distance. Read the wind. Control the rotation. 1 1/4 spins at 15 feet. 2 full rotations at 25. 3 spins at 40. Eric learned to sense the axe's balance in mid-motion and release it at the exact heartbeat when the handle angle, weight, and distance aligned. For Eric's 18th birthday, his grandfather crafted a weapon unlike any he had ever made, a purpose-built throwing axe, lighter than a war axe, but flawlessly balanced. Its narrow beard and razor-edged steel bit were forged from high-carbon metal, fitted onto a smooth Norwegian ash handle. It weighed exactly 2.5 pounds, tuned to Eric's grip and throwing style. Still, Eric never imagined the skill would matter beyond the forge. After school, he worked long shifts on the docks of Ryukon, hauling aluminum crates and dreaming only of a small boat and a quiet life. But in April 1940, when German forces swept into Norway, those simple dreams disappeared overnight. Eric stood helpless as Wehrmacht units flooded into Rjukan, taking over factories, stripping the town of its resources, and turning skilled Norwegian workers into forced labor for the Reich. By 1941, resistance was no longer a choice for him. It was a duty. He began with simple courier work, slipping messages through forest trails, then graduated to moving weapons under the cover of night, and eventually ferrying downed RAF pilots across hidden routes to Sweden. Every mission sharpened the danger. Then came February 1944. A weapons drop went wrong, betrayed from within. The Gestapo struck fast, capturing 12 resistance fighters, Eric among them, and alongside him, his childhood friend Lars Bergman. The Germans shipped them to Greenie, a grim detention camp 8 miles north of Oslo. It wasn't an extermination center, but death lingered in every corner, through freezing nights, disease, and the occasional execution. On arrival, SS guards processed Erik, cataloging each possession. When they discovered the throwing axe tucked in his pack, confusion crossed their faces. Hopster Derm Führer, the interrogating officer, and Klaus Richter examined it with curiosity. Erik calmly said it belonged to his grandfather. Richter sneered, mocking it as a Viking toy, and casually hung it on his office wall next to a captured Norwegian flag. Erik stayed silent, but his mind raced. He memorized the room, measured the distance from the window to the wall, and calculated the height of the mount. Greenie held roughly 300 prisoners in March 1944, a cluster of wooden barracks encircled by double barbed wire, watchtowers at every corner, and a central administrative building where the commandant and senior officers held their authority. The guards worked in 3 shifts, but the night team was the smallest, usually just 12 men patrolling the entire perimeter. Their movements were predictable, pacing the wire every 30 minutes, puffing on cigarettes near the gate, huddling near the brazier when the freezing air bit at their fingers. Erik observed them for 3 long weeks, committing every pattern, every pause, every flaw to memory. The stakes were life or death. The resistance fighters inside Greenie had learned of an impending mass execution. 17 prisoners, including Erik, were marked, accused of sabotaging the Nor Hydro plant, the heavy water facility fueling Germany's atomic ambitions. Oslo headquarters had set the date, March 15th at first light. 17 men, including Erik and Lars, were to be loaded onto trucks, driven into the forest, executed, and buried in unmarked graves. They had barely 36 hours. Escape from Greenie was considered impossible. The 10-foot fences were reinforced with double wire, and any movement after dark was met with gunfire. Previous attempts had ended in grisly warnings. In February, 3 men tried cutting through the wire with smuggled tools. They were caught halfway, beaten unconscious, and executed in the yard as all prisoners watched. But Erik had noticed something no one else had. The northwest guard tower left a blind spot, blocked by the administrative building. A 40-foot stretch plunged in darkness between 11:30 p.m. and midnight. When the guards rotated on March 13th, he quietly revealed his plan to 5 trusted prisoners, each aware that one misstep would mean certain death. They huddled in the latrine during evening count, whispering while the guards paced the compound outside. Erik laid out every detail: the blind spot in the northwest corner, the predictable guard patterns, and the 30-minute window when the tower's light left a stretch of darkness. Halvar Nielsen, a former Oslo police officer, shook his head in disbelief. The wire is too thick to cut fast. The guards will hear. Even if we get through the fence, the outer perimeter is a death trap. Too many patrols, too many dogs, too much open ground. Every word pressed the weight of impossible odds onto their shoulders. Yet Erik's eyes betrayed a quiet certainty. Eric finally revealed the real plan. The axe hanging in Richter's office, the blind spot, and what he could do if he made it inside that building. Halvar Nielsen stared at him in disbelief, asking if he was truly proposing to kill 9 armed guards with a throwing axe. Eric answered calmly, one at a time, before anyone could call for help. Halvar called it madness, but Eric insisted it was their only chance. The group fell silent until Lars, Eric's childhood friend, asked the question that mattered. Could he actually hit a man from 50 feet? Eric explained that he'd done 40 many times, and 50 was possible if he compensated for the extra rotation. Olsen, a farmer, leaned forward and asked if he'd ever killed a man with a thrown axe. Eric admitted he had only practiced on pine logs, but the principle was the same. For nearly 20 seconds, no one spoke. Then Halvar slowly nodded. If Eric reached that axe and took out even half the guards, the others could storm the gate with the advantage of surprise. Lars pressed again. How would he even get inside Richter's office? Eric had spent 3 weeks preparing that answer. Eric explained the final piece of his plan. The administrative building had a coal chute entrance on its north side, unguarded, hidden inside the wire, a spot no prisoner ever approached. ... During the confusion of the 11 p.m. count, he could slip inside, move through the basement, and climb to the 2nd floor. Richter's office was in the southeast corner. Eric had watched them hang the axe there with his own eyes. Once inside, he would eliminate every guard he could see before anyone had time to react. The men agreed. March 14th would be their only chance. The execution trucks were scheduled to arrive at dawn on the 15th. Escape that night or die the next morning. Eric spent the entire day studying guard routes during every count, every meal, every patrol shift. He noted who smoked, who talked too much, who wandered alone. Then he calculated distances from Richter's window to every patrol point. The closest was 42 feet, the farthest 68. He had never hit a target past 50, but on this night, he would have to. At 10:45 p.m. on March 14th, the temperature hovered at 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Eric wore only his thinnest clothes, nothing that could snag, scrape, or rustle, and he had wrapped strips of torn blanket around his boots to muffle every step. During the evening count, he positioned himself near the latrine building, the closest structure to the administrative block. When the guards ordered everyone back to the barracks at 11 p.m., he slipped behind the latrine, pressed himself flat against the wall, and waited as searchlights carved white arcs across the yard, and German voices barked commands. The barracks doors slammed shut, and then came the silence he needed. At 11:12 p.m., he moved. The Northwest Tower guard turned to light a cigarette, opening a brief blind spot, and Eric crossed 40 feet of open ground in 18 seconds, low and silent. The coal chute was exactly where he remembered, a wooden hatch built into the foundation. He lifted it slowly, allowing the hinges to creak in their natural rhythm rather than forcing them quiet, and prepared to slip inside. The creak blended perfectly with the wind, and Eric slipped inside, lowering the door behind him as he descended into total darkness. The basement smelled of coal dust and mildew, the kind of stagnant air that never moved. He placed both hands against the stone walls and advanced by memory. 12 steps to the east wall. Turn left. 20 more to the stairwell. The administrative building rose 2 stories above a stone foundation, its wooden interior old enough that every stair complained under pressure. Eric took them slowly, pausing after each creak, listening for movement above. Nothing. The guards never patrolled inside at night. Why would they? Prisoners weren't supposed to be able to reach the building at all. He reached the 2nd floor at 11:28 p.m. Artur's office was the 3rd door on the right. The handle resisted when he tested it, locked just as he expected. From his pocket, he drew a straightened piece of bunk spring wire and slid it into the mechanism. His hands didn't shake. He'd picked locks before during resistance operations. This one was German-made, solid and stubborn, but not complicated. The cylinder yielded after 90 seconds of steady pressure, and the door eased open. Artur's office lay in darkness, lit only by a wash of moonlight spilling across the floor. Eric saw the axe immediately, mounted on the wall between 2 Wehrmacht recruitment posters, his grandfather's work. The handle was worn smooth from years of practice, the blade still sharp despite the Germans' neglect. He lifted it from its mount, feeling the familiar weight settle into his hand, testing the balance with a slight tilt of his wrist. Perfect. Exactly as he remembered. Crossing to the window, he peered out over the compound. 9 guards were visible, 3 smoking near the main gate, 2 pacing the eastern fence, 1 in the northwest tower, 1 checking the wire near the latrine, 2 more drifting along the gap between the inner and outer perimeter. All carried rifles. Most had pistols at their hips. They walked with lazy confidence. No urgency, no caution. Why would they worry? The prisoners were locked in their barracks, half-starved and unarmed. Eric eased the window open, letting a rush of cold night air wash over him. He evaluated each distance with a practiced eye. The nearest guard stood 42 feet away by the gate, rifle slung loose over his shoulder. Another walked the fence at 45 feet. The tower guard was farther, 53 feet, and the outer perimeter patrols were beyond 60, possibly out of reach. Eric ripped the axe free with one hard pull, took the guard's rifle, checked the magazine, 8 rounds, and turned just as the second guard rounded the administrative building. The man froze at the sight of the body, started to raise his weapon. Eric's axe was already in the air, spinning across 45 feet in 2.5 rotations, before slamming into the guard's chest below the sternum, punching through bone and into his heart. The man gasped, tried to shout, but no air came. He toppled backward. Eric reached him in seconds, retrieved the axe again, grabbed the rifle and ammunition. 2 down, 7 to go. Still no alarm. But the tower guard had spotted movement and swung the searchlight toward the building. Eric dropped flat beside the corpse, the cold cutting through his clothes. The beam hovered over him, slid away. The tower guard shouted in German, once, then louder. No answer came. Eric rolled behind the building's corner just as the searchlight swept back, hearing the tower guard work the bolt of his rifle and shout for the gate detail. The 3 gate guards began advancing, rifles raised, fanning out to investigate. Eric had maybe 20 seconds before they found the bodies and triggered the full alarm. He stepped from cover with the stolen rifle and fired twice, dropping 1 guard as another dove behind the shack. The 3rd sprinted toward the barracks, shouting. Eric tracked him, fired, missed. The man reached the door and pounded on it, yelling for reinforcements just as the power guard opened fire. Rounds cracked into the frozen ground at Eric's feet, spraying dirt. Eric sprinted for the fence, dove into a drainage ditch, and rose to 1 knee with the axe in hand. The tower guard was 53 feet away and 15 feet up, an impossible angle. Eric stood, drew back, and released. The axe spun 3 full rotations, climbing into the cold air on a perfect rising arc. The axe struck the tower guard's shoulder instead of his head, buried deep in muscle and bone, but not a kill shot. The man screamed, dropping his rifle and clawing at the axe handle. Eric grabbed the 2nd stolen rifle, fired 4 rounds, and 2 found their mark. The guard tumbled backward through the railing, crashing to the ground like splintering timber. Eric sprinted to him, pulled the axe free, and ended it with a swift strike. 4 guards down, 5 to go. Outside, 2 perimeter guards were sprinting toward the compound, drawn by the gunfire, while the man who had reached the barracks kept shouting, rallying reinforcements. The remaining gate guard stayed behind cover, firing blindly. Eric counted rounds. 6 fired, maybe 4 left. Eric didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. He raised the axe. The guard squeezed his eyes shut. Eric struck once. The screaming stopped. 6 guards lay dead. 3 remained. The barracks guard still shouted, though his hammering on the doors had ceased. He had realized what was happening, that his comrades were dying one by one, systematically. Eric heard boots pounding the frozen ground as the man ran toward the commandant's quarters to raise the full alarm. Without hesitation, Eric gave chase. The guard had a 40-yard head start, but Eric was faster, propelled by urgent instinct and 3 weeks of hunger-fueled, relentless rage. He closed the distance, 30 yards, then 20. The guard glanced back, saw Eric gaining, and tried to sprint faster. His boots slipped on ice. He fell, scrambled to his feet, losing precious seconds. Eric released the axe from 25 feet. 1 perfect rotation, and it struck between the shoulder blades, severing the spine. The man collapsed face first, sliding across the ice, motionless. Eric retrieved the axe, chest burning, lungs heaving. 7 guards down, 2 left, probably in the command quarters, likely already triggering the alarm. He sprinted to the building, kicked open the door. 2 guards scrambled inside, reaching for weapons. 1 drew a pistol. Eric hurled the axe, 15 feet, 1 rotation, striking the throat, crushing the windpipe, pinning him to the wall. The last guard raised a rifle, aimed at Eric's chest. He dove left as the shot rang out, the bullet punching through the wall where he had stood. Rolling, Eric came up with a stolen rifle and fired 3 times. Every round hit center mass. The guard staggered, collapsed. and did not move. Silence enveloped the room. Eric stood alone in the command quarters, surrounded by German corpses, gripping his grandfather's axe. Blood dripped from the axe blade. Eric's hands shook, chest heaving. From the first throw to the final shot, the entire engagement had lasted just 8 minutes. 9 guards were dead. No alarms had sounded. The rest of the camp had no idea what had just happened. Moving quickly, Eric ran back to the barracks, kicking open doors and shouting in Norwegian. Prisoners poured out, confused and terrified, their eyes widening at the bodies scattered across the compound. Lars reached him first, gripping his shoulders. "What did you do?" he asked. "Exactly what I said I would," Eric replied. "We have maybe 10 minutes before someone realizes the guards are gone. Get everyone to the gate." 17 prisoners, all scheduled for execution, gathered at the main gate. Eric smashed open the weapons locker, distributing rifles and pistols. Most of the men had military experience, and they knew how to fight. They formed a defensive line, while Eric worked the gate lock with wire picks, finally freeing it after 2 tense minutes. Goint. The gate swung wide. Freedom lay just beyond. At 12:23 a.m. on March 15, 1944, they sprinted into the Norwegian forest. The temperature had fallen to 25 degrees Fahrenheit. None wore proper winter gear. Most hadn't eaten a full meal in weeks. Yet they moved fast, driven by raw survival instinct. Eric led them northwest toward the Swedish border, 12 miles through enemy territory, carrying 2 rifles, his axe, and 120 rounds of ammunition. The first 2 miles were quiet. Dark forest, no roads, no patrols. But at 1:15 a.m., barking dogs shattered the silence. The Germans had discovered the bodies, sending soldiers and trackers in pursuit. At least 20 men, maybe more. The group couldn't outrun them. They had to fight or hide. Eric chose a frozen stream, a narrow crossing that would force the enemy to funnel through, and prepared for the confrontation. Eric positioned his 17 men in a tight semicircle, instructing them to aim low and conserve ammunition. The dogs arrived first. 3 German shepherds straining against their leashes. Their handlers were only 15 feet behind, illuminated by the pale moonlight. Eric fired twice. Both handlers dropped instantly. The dogs hesitated, confused, then scattered into the darkness. From the tree line, German soldiers opened fire, bullets ripping through branches above the refugees' heads, splintering wood and sending shards of ice raining down. Every man dropped low, hearts pounding, weapons ready, knowing a single mistake could end everything. Eric's men returned fire, aiming at muzzle flashes, and a fierce firefight raged for 4 minutes. The Germans lost 5 men to precise Norwegian shots and fell back, regrouping to attempt a flank from the east. Eric quickly repositioned his defense, keeping them contained. By 2:30 a.m., the attackers withdrew completely, either out of ammunition or unwilling to suffer more losses. Eric waited 20 tense minutes to be certain, then led the group northwest, leaving the stream crossing for the deeper forest. 3 refugees were wounded, slowing the pace. Lars carried Peterson, hit in the leg, while Eric scouted ahead, alert for patrols and choosing the safest path. At 4 a.m., they reached a frozen lake. Sweden lay 6 miles beyond. The ice looked solid, but February's warm spell made it uncertain. Eric tested it with his boot. It flexed, but didn't crack. They would have to risk it. Going around would cost hours, and dawn was coming at 6:30 a.m. The Germans would track them easily once daylight came. The group crossed the frozen lake in single file, carefully spreading their weight. The ice groaned beneath them, but held. Halfway across, Eric heard sharp cracking. He ordered everyone to stop, lie flat, and distribute their weight. 3 tense minutes passed as the ice settled. Then they continued, slowly, cautiously. Every man made it to the far shore. The final 5 miles were a blur of exhaustion. Eric's legs burned, his feet numb, fingers frozen. Others fared worse. Peterson, wounded in the leg, was unconscious and carried by 2 men, while Olsen, the farmer, coughed up blood, likely pneumonia. Every step tested their limits, but freedom lay just ahead. They needed shelter, medical care, and warmth. At 7:42 a.m. on March 15, 1944, they crossed into Sweden. A border patrol spotted them just 200 yards past the markers. The Swedish soldiers lowered their weapons at the sight of the exhausted, battered group. One radioed for medical assistance. Another handed Eric a cup of water. He collapsed against a tree, finally allowing himself to stop. All 17 prisoners had survived. Swedish authorities transported them to a hospital in Kiruna, treating wounds and frostbite. Eric lost 3 toes to cold damage. Olsen developed severe pneumonia, but recovered after 2 weeks. Peterson's leg wound healed without infection. Freedom had been won, but at a high cost. They spent 6 weeks in Sweden before being transported to England to join Norwegian forces in exile. Eric's debriefing took place in London during April 1944. British intelligence officers didn't believe his initial account. 9 German guards killed with a throwing axe. Impossible. They questioned him repeatedly, looking for inconsistencies. Eric told the same story every time. The officers brought in the other 16 refugees. Every man confirmed Eric's account. The guards died exactly as Eric described. The evidence was undeniable. Norwegian intelligence filed an after-action report dated April 28, 1944. It documented the escape, the killings, the pursuit, the survival. The report noted that no previous escape from Grini had succeeded. It recommended Eric for Norway's highest military decoration, the War Cross with Sword. The award ceremony took place in London on June 3, 1944, 2 days before D-Day. King Håkon VII, Norway's exiled monarch, presented the medal personally. Eric stood at attention as King Håkon VII pinned the War Cross to his uniform. The 16 other survivors were there, some openly weeping. After the war, Eric never spoke of the mission. He returned to Rjukan in 1945, finding his father still at the aluminum plant and discovering his grandfather had died during the occupation. The old forge lay abandoned, tools rusted, centuries-old Viking techniques all but forgotten. Eric cleaned out the forge, sold the equipment, and used the money to buy a small fishing boat. He spent the rest of his life on Norwegian waters, catching cod and mackerel, living alone in a cabin near the coast. The men he had saved stayed in contact, gathering every March 15th in Oslo. 17 men who should never have survived. They drank, remembered that frozen night when Eric Andersen had killed 9 guards without raising an alarm. Lars Bergman became a teacher, telling students about the war and always mentioning Eric's name. Halvard Nielsen returned to the Oslo police, eventually rising to chief of detectives. Peterson recovered from his leg wound and returned to farming. All of the survivors remembered Eric as the man who had saved their lives with his grandfather's axe. Eric passed away in 1983 at the age of 62, suffering a heart attack while working his fishing nets. His funeral in Ryokan drew 200 people, including 12 of the original 17 survivors. Now old men, white-haired and bent, they buried him with his war cross and his grandfather's throwing axe. The priest spoke of courage and sacrifice, but the survivors said nothing. They didn't need to. They already knew the truth of what Eric had done. Captured German records confirmed the details of the Greenie escape. 9 guards killed on March 14 to 15, 1944. The method of death was initially listed as an unknown bladed weapon. Later investigation confirmed it had been a thrown axe or hatchet. The Germans never understood how a single prisoner had acquired such a weapon or honed the skill to kill trained soldiers from 50 feet away. In response, they increased guard numbers at Greenie, added searchlights, and reinforced the fences, but nothing could stop the story from spreading. Word traveled through the camp, then across occupied Norway. The resistance used it as a beacon of hope. One man, armed with an axe, had killed 9 Germans and freed 17 patriots. Even today, military historians debate whether such a feat was truly possible, yet the legend of Eric Andersen endures. Throwing axe experts note that 50 feet is near the maximum effective range for accuracy. Olympic competitors rarely exceed 40 feet. But Eric Andersen wasn't competing. He was fighting for survival, and the mechanics were flawless. The physics worked. Witnesses confirmed every detail, and captured German records documented 9 guards killed by bladed trauma in just 8 minutes. The story endures not because of the weapon, but because it demonstrates what one individual's courage can accomplish against impossible odds. Eric Andersen was no professional soldier, just a dock worker who learned a nearly forgotten skill from his grandfather. Yet that skill saved 17 lives and delivered a small but powerful blow against occupation. He never sought fame, returning instead to simple, humble work and dying quietly. The men he saved never forgot him, and neither should we. If you found this story compelling, please like this video, subscribe to uncover more untold histories, and leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from.